Thank you so much for being here. Tell us first, what is the FAFSA?
Sure. FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's the most important form a family and a student needs to be aware of in order to qualify for financial aid.
How can families best prepare themselves to fill out the FAFSA?
Good question. First off, you must print out an actual FAFSA. The form actually is an electronic form, so you will fill it out online. But the biggest strategy is to print out the forms first, have your tax return and all your financial information in front of you so that you can actually fill out the FAFSA. That way you can go line by line and ensure that there's no mistakes. Because the first and foremost, in order to qualify for financial aid, is you want to make sure you plan ahead, you submit the financial aid forms correctly, and that you don't have any mistakes in order to qualify for grants and financial aid. PPY stands for prior year. The federal government is actually going to go back 2 years in order to qualify for financial aid. That means that parents, if you are planning to send your child to college in 2017, you're going to need your 2015 tax returns. With the preparation, you want to make sure that every single question, line by line, gets submitted between the student and the parent. In the preparation, you have to understand that the first section of the FAFSA has a section that says student information. So you want to make sure the first section is student information and then follow the prompts to the parent.
So families should then really be starting to think about this process when their students are around the 10th grade?
You have to actually start preparing 2 years in advance. So you have 2 ways to prepare. One is you have the actual form that has to be submitted so that you can strategize. And the second is planning ahead, meaning how do you position your income, your assets, and all the strategies that parents need to know in order to qualify for grants and financial aid.
We had talked a little bit earlier about net worth, and I know you have some specific advice for people about filling out the net worth section of the form. Can you share that?
Sure. If I ask a parent and a student, what is net worth? What's your definition of net worth? The actual definition of net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. Therefore, if you list all your assets and subtract it by your liabilities, guess what? You just made a big mistake and it could cost you a ton of money. I'll give you an example. We have a family right now that was submitting the financial aid form. The guy is an engineer, he's a techie guy, he understands how to fill out forms and he's very, very technical and meticulous with these forms. He was submitting these financial aid forms in his first year for his son. He went through the financial aid questions and said, I understand everything, I did this form correctly. Brian, can you review this for me? I looked at it and he had $350,000 listed under his net worth. I asked him, how did you list $350,000 under this question on the FAFSA? He said, well, Brian, I called my financial planner and I looked at my financial statements and I added all my assets, subtracted my liabilities, and I came up with net worth. I said, can you define a little bit more? What do you mean by that? He said, well, Brian, I have $250,000 in a 401k and I have $100,000 net worth in my primary residence. I said, well, I'm sorry to say that based on the federal government's definition of net worth, you just overlisted your net worth and you made a mistake. So it's really important when you fill out the forms that when you read the questions, you must understand the definition from the context of the federal government, not what you and I define as net worth.
So this is great advice. Can you just clarify what can you not list on the FAFSA when you're filling that out, when you're filling out the net worth section?
Sure. The important thing is, back to the preparing the FAFSA and having the actual form printed, when you print the actual FAFSA PDF online, you actually get instructions of line by line every question. So even though you may see the questions seem pretty basic, don't rely on your understanding of the question. Go through the instructions page of the actual FAFSA and make sure you understand how to define every question. So if we're talking about the net worth, it says what to include and what not to include. So under the section that says what not to include would be your primary residence. You don't include your primary residence. You don't include your 401k. You don't include your IRAs. You don't include pension and such. And then there's a section that says all the information you do need to include. And that would be such as stocks, mutual funds, CDs, rental properties, etc. Those are things that do count in the process. And the good news is that with all of those strategies, you can actually start understanding how can I go above and beyond and reposition things to make sure you can qualify, which goes back to why I think a parent should start 2 years in advance, because they could get familiar with the questions and look at how can we change things or make adjustments in our overall financial picture so that way we can get massive amount of financial aid and grants just by strategizing.
Are there any other major mistakes that you see families make on the FAFSA?
They say basically on the federal government and different websites out there, there's a report of over 80% error rates on these financial aid forms.
Oh, wow.
Which means that if there are so many errors will show the school that you can actually pay more for college. And with mistakes, you end up qualifying for less grants and financial aid. So there's a ton of mistakes on these forms. I'll give you an example. When you submit the FAFSA, the first section of the FAFSA, we had a family come in and they were submitting the financial aid form. In the first section, if they don't read the fine print, it says, what is your income? That's referring to the student, actually. And I was going through a financial aid form.
Oh, wow.
And I was going through the lines and I saw a parent that listed $67,000 a year as income.
For the student.
For the student. But because these forms generally are filled out by the parents reading the question, it says, what is your income? And it had $67,000. So we took the $67,000 from the student section, that was a mistake. We listed it under the parent section, and because of that, we qualify for $25,000 in financial aid.
Wow, so just one simple mistake on the form costs $25,000.
Exactly.
Basically. Great. Do you have any other pro insider tips for families who are watching?
Yeah, number one, parents. It doesn't matter what your income level is. Always, always, always fill out a financial aid form. Grants and financial aid is not just for low-income families. You can get financial aid no matter what your income is. So it's very important that you first fill out a FAFSA. You submit the FAFSA early. Grants are on a first-come, first-served basis. Submit the FAFSA as early as you can. You can actually now submit the FAFSA because of the new PPY system as early as October 1.
Thank you so much for that. And one final question. I've been really thinking about some of the non-traditional families that might be watching. Do you have any advice?
Sure, good question. For non-traditional parents and families, it's important to understand that that refers to whether you're divorced, separated, grandparents taking care of the kids. It all falls under that category. The good news for you is that in a lot of cases with the colleges, you can submit the financial aid form under one parent. So the mistake that I see is, I'll give you an example. We just had a family just come in. They're divorced, but they're amicable, wanting to help their kid go to college. So when they came in, they were going to submit their financial aid form. The dad makes $105,000 a year. He's a real estate agent. And the mom makes $55,000 a year, and she's a teacher. So what we did was, if we combined both income, they make over $160,000 a year, and they would be disqualified in certain grants and scholarships. They didn't know that, because on the FAFSA it says list the parent, the father, the mother. It says everything. They don't tell you what to include, what to exclude. So a mistake here would be, we want to submit the FAFSA under one parent and list it under the parent that the student lives with 51% of the time. So what we did here was, Jason, who lives with the mom 100% of the time, dad is there helping out, but we listed everything under the mom's name. Because of that, we qualified for something called a Pell Grant, which is a federal grant. It's $5,800. We got the Cal Grant, which is $12,200. Just because of that one strategy, how we structured that, we were able to get almost $20,000 in free money because of those strategies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here with us, Brian. We really appreciate it.